Hope you had a good day today. We're going to start off with a hymn. Let's all stand. 388. You can grab a hymnal or look at the screen. I've anchored my soul in the haven of rest. Song 388 as we all stand together. Let's sing it out on that first verse. My soul in sad exile was out on life's sea, so burdened with sin and distress, till I heard a sweet voice saying, make me your choice, and I entered the haven of rest. I've anchored my soul in the haven of rest. I'll sail the wide seas no more. The tempest may sweep o'er the wild stormy deep. In Jesus I'm safe evermore. Sing it on that second. I yielded myself to his tender embrace, and faith taking hold of the word, my fetters fell off, and I anchored my soul. The haven of rest is my Lord. Sing it on that chorus. I've anchored my soul in the haven of rest. I'll sail the wide seas no more. The tempest may sweep o'er the wild stormy deep. In Jesus I'm safe evermore. Sing that last verse. The song of my soul, since the Lord made me whole, has been the old story so blessed, of Jesus who'll save whosoever will have a home in the haven of rest. I've anchored my soul in the haven of rest. I'll sail the wide seas no more. The tempest may sweep o'er the wild stormy deep. In Jesus I'm safe evermore. Song 187 while you're standing there, if you need it. Amazing Grace. Song 187. Sing it on that first. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. it a cappella, just your voices as the instruments. When we've been there 10,000 years. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Good singing. You may be seated.
Welcome, everyone. This is our last of the Wednesday night hot dog days. So we're so excited you've chosen here. You all packed in on one side. It's kind of weird. Like, look around the auditorium. Does it seem kind of weird? Right? But those online, that's all they see is the back of your heads. They think that both sides are full. That's great. Sure appreciate our deacons. They put on the hot dog nights. And so Brother Don, he's been there. Normally when we do all these, he's the one cooking. I don't know how we're going to have hot dogs. We're still having hot dogs, right? So Brother Don cooked the hot dogs before, and he's teaching tonight. I've asked him to teach tonight. During Vacation Bible School, we did something different this year, and we actually tried to have all the parents come with their kids, and then while the kids had their class time, we had adult class in here. And I think it was Tuesday night, I sat in, and I was listening to Brother Don teach, and it was such a good lesson. I thought, man, I wish the teenagers could hear this, and I wish the young kids and all the adults could hear it. So I said, let's do another hot dog fundraiser, hot dog kickoff, whatever we want to call it. Have Brother Don come and teach us lesson. It's a really good lesson. I really hope you pay attention. You will learn something. It is very interesting tonight. And if anything, it's going to cause you to have a lot of questions. And if you want to know why, normally on Wednesday night, Brother Rob Chiswick, he's the one that leads the singing. Well, we're having hot dogs tonight, and he's his little PTSD when it comes to hot dogs. Because his team lost the hot dog fundraiser. And so, therefore, his punishment was to be turned into a human hot dog. And we got like 6 bottles of ketchup and mustard. And he says the worst part was the relish. I think the worst part was everything came fresh out of the refrigerator. It was so freezing cold on him, you know? So that was a good time. I love just torturing the deacons. It's wonderful. So anyways, so glad you're here. So glad you've tuned in. I'm going to turn things over to Brother Don. He'll have a lesson for us. And then afterwards, don't rush out. Enjoy. We have some hot dogs and some snacks downstairs. It's a beautiful day. The kids can play in the playground. We got the 9 square, and just enjoy the fellowship. We're a church family. We're a fellowship of believers, and some of the sweetest time we have here is we can just get to know each other a little bit better and hang out with each other. So, all right, Brother Don, come and expand our minds, would you?
So, if you're in your Bibles, we'll be in Psalms 39, or 139. So tonight's lesson is going to be more of a kind of apologetic in nature, more than an actual Bible study. For apologetics, kind of goes, I've always told my kids it's important to know what you believe in. And so the Bible studies is kind of the what. You have to know about Christ, you have to know about the resurrection, the death, burial, resurrection, so you have to know the what you believe in. But I told them it's equally important to know why you believe it. Because if I can talk you into salvation, somebody else is going to talk you out of it. You have to be grounded. You have to have more than just faith is good, but even if you go back in history, they have levels of faith. And depending upon what level you're in, even in James talks about that, if you say you believe in God, even the devils believe. But that doesn't equate to salvation. So there's more to it than just say, I believe there's a God. And so it's important to know. In Romans chapter 10, verse 14 through 17, most of you are probably familiar with that, but in verse 17 it says, faith cometh by hearing, hearing by the word of God. And so before that it talks about how should they call on him and who they not believe. So it's important to know what you believe in. And so when pastor preaches and Wednesday night, your Sunday school teachers, whatever, they're going to tell you about Christ. And it's important to know that information because you have to know what you're going to believe in. Tonight's lesson is going to deal more with the why. If someone asks you, like the verse in 1 Peter talks about, to give an answer to every man who asks you the reason that hope is in you with meekness and fear. So if someone asks you why you believe what you believe, you need to be prepared to give an answer. That Greek word answer is actually apologia, which is where we get the word apologetics from. And so most people say apologize. We've turned it into I'm sorry, but it's really to give a defense. The actual Greek meaning is to defend. So when it talks about giving an answer, it's to defend your faith. So hopefully this works. Maybe not. Maybe. Maybe if I turned it on, it would work. Hey, there we go. So that's the verse I just talked about, and we're doing kind of an apologetic view. I got a quote there by A.W. Tozer: "The modern scientist has lost God amid the wonders of this world." So the verse tonight we're talking about in Psalms chapter 139 is actually split into a couple different verses. But that's another quote by Tozer. The most important thing about you is what comes in your mind when you think of God. Everything in your life is directed, influenced by your knowledge of God. The decisions you make, the places you go, the associations you make, what you believe and how you live, these are all governed by who you believe God is. If you have a little God, little faith, your life will reflect that. If you have a big God, big faith, your life will reflect that. The basic trouble with our churches today is their unworthy concept of God. Our religion is weak because, in our minds, God is weak. Christianity, at any given time, is strong or weak, dependent upon our concept of God. And so we have to know not just, again, how we believe or what we believe, but why we believe it. What is our concept of God? So in Psalm 139, splits up into 4 sections. Basically, some will have 5, but the 5th is just in the last couple sections. Verses 1 through 6. This is an interesting psalm. If nobody's ever read it before, some of you are probably very familiar with at least the last couple verses in Psalms. But if you're not familiar with Psalm 139, it's a very interesting book. It's split into sections. Verses 1 through 6, you're dealing with the omniscience of God. I put a couple verses in there. I'm not going to go through all of them for the sake of time, but you can see verses 1, the Lord has searched me. He knows about me. Verse 6, the knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain unto it. So David he's getting a right view of God. God is all knowing. He has searched David, but he's not just that. He knows everything. Verses 7 through 12, God is omnipresent. And he goes through a series of verses there. Whether I go, no matter where I go, God, you're there. And so there's just a verses there. Verses 13 through 17, that's what we're going to focus on tonight. God is omnipotent. And you talk about God's creative power. We're going to deal with that, and marvelous are thy works is kind of the key focus on this whole chapter. And in verses 18 through 24, if you read that, you're going to kind of get a view of the holiness of God. And then some people will split this up. You get into justice of God and the holiness of God, but it's really focusing on God's holiness. And because of his holiness, he can't deal with or will not tolerate sin. So Psalm 139, what had just happened? Guess I'm hitting the button. Psalm 139, this is where we're supposed to be. For the Lord hath, we're going to read verses 13 through 17. For the Lord hath possessed my reins. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfected. In thy book all my members were written, and in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. How precious are my thoughts unto thee, O God! How great is the sum of them! There's a lot in here. We're only really going to focus on verse 14, but we could spend a lot of time in all these verses. But verse 14, we're going to focus on marvelous. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works. And so when David's talking about marvelous are thy works, if you look at throughout Psalms, and I put this up here, David refers to God's creative work all throughout, and we're not going to just turn to all of these because we'll be here all night just looking through this. But a couple verses that he's talking about, some of these you may know. Psalm 8, 3 and 4, when I consider thy heavens, thy work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars, which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? So, again, this is the Eagle Nebula. I love, looking at the pictures that are coming off the new satellite. This is the other one, Psalm 33, 6. The Lord merely spoke, and the heavens were created. He breathed the word, and all the stars were born. And in Psalm 19, verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. And David here is talking about God's creation basically speaks about God's power. I mean, you look at the heavens and everything else. And so in these verses and a lot of other places throughout Psalms, David is referring to, he's looking outward, he's looking at God's creation. He's looking at the heavens, the stars, all these just kind of examples here. But in the section of Psalms 139, Psalms chapter 139, he's looking inward. He's looking at the human. He's looking at God's creation. If you read 139, verses 13 and 14, he's talking about his being created, God knowing him before he was even formed in his mother's womb. And so he's focusing on that, and the main reason is, if you look at it, of all of God's creation, we are the only ones created in the image of God. And we're not going to have time to spend, but Genesis chapter 1, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Of all of God's creation, we are the only ones made in his image. And so he focuses on the creative nature of God, but he's focusing on the human. And so this is where pretty much kind of kick it off. I knew we were going to have little ones here tonight, so I kept things kind of cartoonishy. But if you look at the skeleton, and I'm sorry you probably can't have a hard time reading that. I tried to pack as much as I could in a small slide, so the font got a little too small. But there are typically 206 bones in the human body. The bones are actually the structure of the human body. We couldn't breathe without our bones. Lungs would just collapse upon themselves. Besides providing shape to the human body, the bones permit motion, motor capability. They protect the vital organs. You got your rib cage, your heart, everything's located, of course, behind your rib cage. Facilitate breathing, of course. And they produce a variety of cells in the bone marrow, which are critical for survival. And so we have our skeleton. Now, typical 206 bones, when you're born, you have actually more bones. And as you get a little older, the bones fuse together and things like that. So with this in the skeleton, that's kind of a simple one. But what's interesting with the heart beats around 100,000 times per day. That's about 3 billion beats in an average lifetime. The heart pumps around 6 quarts of blood through the body regularly. And of course, the heart is located at the center of the chest. Every day, the heart creates enough energy to drive a truck 20 miles. In a lifetime, that's equivalent to driving to the moon and back, which is about 477,000 miles. So if you think about the work your heart is doing, and it's continuing. We're going to get on a little further as we go. Interesting is you don't think about it. You don't think about breathing. You don't think about your heart beating. There's just things that your body does just naturally. During an average lifetime, the heart will pump nearly 1.5 million barrels of blood. It's enough to fill 200 train cars. So you think about what your body's doing, again, it's just doing it. You don't think about it. We're going to talk about some of the activity within the brain here in a little bit. But another interesting fact, blood vessels. So your heart pumps, it pumps through the blood vessels. There are about 60,000 miles of blood vessels in your body. You can actually, if you were able to take a person's blood vessels and stretch them out, it would wrap around the earth almost a little less than 2.5 times. Every person has roughly that many blood vessels. Approximately 400 miles of capillaries are in the brain alone. So if you just think about the blood flowing through the brain, you have about 400 miles of capillaries within your brain. You think about the distance, about traveling, how much that's in there. The only part of the body that doesn't take air is the outside of your eye, the cornea. It takes oxygen directly from the air. Every other part of your body is directly affected by the blood delivered to the heart. Everybody's probably most excited. Now, we can go through this and spend all night on every organ, but I just picked some out because I thought they were really interesting. Who in here likes liver? Does anybody here eat liver? My parents, my dad was a huge liver and onion fan. I just really couldn't stand the smell of it. But there's actually some interesting facts. I didn't put a picture of this because no. The liver filters all the blood in the body and breaks down poisonous substances such as alcohol, drugs, and things like that. Did I put that on here? Yeah. I'll put it on the next slide. The liver produces bile, the fluid that helps digest fats, carry away waste, so your digestive system won't function properly without your liver. It regulates amino acids. The production of proteins depends on these amino acids. And it makes sure that their levels are proper in the bloodstream and remains healthy. The liver regulates blood clotting. Most of us have cut ourselves. You got platelets in your blood, it clots the blood. The liver is the one that regulates that. It says they're created using vitamin K, which can only be absorbed with the help of the bile. So basically the liver that produces the information to produce, with vitamin K, to produce the clotting factors in your blood. The liver holds approximately 1 pint of blood at every given moment. It resists infection, resists infection is part of the filtering process. It removes bacteria from the bloodstream. There it is. Stores vitamins and minerals. The liver stores significant amounts of vitamins, A, K, E, B12, iron, copper, so the liver stores all those and as you need it. What I didn't know, and this is why I started studying the liver, is my parents are diabetic, so I kind of monitor my blood sugar because I know my parents are diabetic, my brother's diabetic, both of them are, so I'm thinking, I'm the oldest one in the family. I figured I'm probably on borrowed time, so I try to monitor my sugar. Well, I go to bed and my blood sugar is, pretty low, 109. I thought, great. Wake up in the morning and my blood sugar is like 126. I'm like, why is my blood sugar higher after fasting for 8 to 10 hours? Because the liver. The liver stores glucose. And then I was reading about studying this, thinking, why is this happening? It's because when you wake up in the morning, the liver releases that to kind of jumpstart your system. And so the liver stores the sugars, and then when you wake up in the morning, it kind of releases everything to kind of kickstart your system to get you up and moving in the morning. So that was kind of information that I found out. And after I started studying more about that, what else does the liver do? And it worked its way in the presentation here. The eye. Now this is, we look at our human eye. So my background is in engineering, both my master's and bachelor's degrees in engineering. And so I deal with vision systems where I've worked at, we're camera systems with hooked to computers, algorithms. We're trying to mimic a person looking at something. We're trying to mimic that with cameras and computer systems. So when we look at the human eye, it has about 2 million moving parts. You don't think about that, but within your eye, you're focusing everything else. It has about 2 million moving parts that work to help you see. You look at fingerprint scannings, like for instance, when people check in at work, they have a fingerprint scan when they clock in. They said fingerprint scans have about 40 unique characteristics. So, people do fingerprinting, things like that. Whereas the iris in the eye has 256 unique characteristics. And so when you look at biometrics scanning for security, people are going more and more to retinal scans because there's just a magnitude higher, so much more higher of characteristics you can focus in on. Our eyes focus on about 50 different objects every second. So if you think of the people in here, as you scan, if I'm standing up front, I'm looking at everybody, I'm focusing, you can focus at every distance. And so if you were to have a camera here and you have to give it maybe a second, back, it takes time for the lens to focus, for the automatic focus. But your eye every second is able to focus on that many different objects. This is another interesting fact that I didn't know about until I started studying more about the eye. The human eye can detect over 10 million colors. I mentioned this. I figure that's probably more in lines with the ladies in the group. My wife can see colors. I don't think I really... Of course, she knows the colors, too. She goes, this is this color. I'd never heard of the color before, but, and it's green. Well, it's not really green. It's whatever. And so the human eye can detect 10 million different colors. But the 10 million different colors are shades of grays. So in your eye, they're different types, so they call them cones. And so there's so many of them that detect color, and there's so many of them that detect shades of gray. The human eye, if the human eye were a digital camera, it would have a resolution of 576 megapixels. So the resolution in your eye is that fine. So when you think of cameras now, I just put in there the iPhone 12, Samsung S22, they're both 12 megapixel cameras. But your human eye resolution is 576. So you can see just how much better your human eye is than any camera right now that's being developed. And this is an interesting fact for those book readers out there. Kelsey. A person normally reads 25% slower reading on a screen than reading in a book. So just interesting studies. There's a whole lot of stuff out there, but I had to condense due to time. Because I'm kind of hungry, so I'm ready for hot dogs myself. Another interesting fact, the nervous system. There are 45 miles of nerves running through your body. Messages of electrical impulses, they travel at a speed of 248 miles per hour in your body. So the electrical impulses, so if you smash your fingers or whatever like that, you pretty much have it instantly. Your body has approximately 14 billion nerve cells and over 1 trillion other cells that provide communication along and between all parts of the body. A computer working 400 million calculations per second, operating for 100 years, would accomplish what your brain can accomplish with the nervous system in 1 minute. So, which is where it kind of gets a little more interesting, but the cell, because we're going to lead that into the brain here in a minute, but the cell, your body contains around 50 to 100 trillion cells. They vary widely in size and number and structure. Experts estimate there's roughly around 200 cell types in the body. Of course, the cells function on their own. They create their own energy. They're self-replicating. And they pretty much contain the instructions and information to cause you to live and grow or whatever. As you study, and we're going to get into just towards the end, I'm hoping to get there. Time's running by real quick. But the reason we're going through all this, especially for, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the Darwin's theory of evolution. I listen to a lot of, if you want to say, apologetic type classes, and there was one that has the mathematics of Darwinism, and basically it's a group of mathematicians sitting around talking about how improbable life is. Now, these aren't Christians. One of them is, but one would consider, he would say, I'm more maybe of an agnostic, and the other one said, really, I don't really believe in a God, but Darwinism is just way too far out there. And I say that is because this. His name's David Berlinski, and he said that the cell itself is extremely complex, and every time we study more and more about the human cell, we find more and more complexity within the cell. And he said the whole point of Darwinism, and evolution, is to come to a theory of how life began, how life created. As we find more and more complexity, we get further and further away from that goal because we can't explain the complexity that we're seeing to explain the origin. So things like this just can't come into being. And he said, just as an example, he said to create an amino acid. So you're in your DNA, you create amino acids, you have 20 possible amino acids. And these amino acids, you stack them on top of each other, combine them, and you create a protein. And the protein are the building blocks of how we live, breathe, whatever. It's the building blocks of life. And so there's 20 possible amino acids. A simple protein of about 150 amino acids, and they said that's a simple protein. They did the calculations on it, and they'd done studies. And this is just information they found out in probably the last 20 years. But a chain of 150 amino acids, when you look at 150 amino acids, it comes out to, when you do the calculations, it's a 20 to 150th power possible combinations of these amino acids. So the combinations are huge. Well, a long time ago, we got all these combinations. It's pretty easy to create life. Over the last 20 years, they found that they make all these combinations, but 1 in the 77th power, or 10 to the 77th power of those combinations is pretty much gibberish. So when they started doing the math, they found that really you're only finding one feasible protein, out of 10 to the 77th. And basically there's no way this is random chance. There's no way this could happen when you're looking at odds that great. Think about winning the lottery 10, 15 times in a row. You'd probably have better chances doing that than you would creating something like this out of nothing. And so when you look at it, the complexity of life and what and how we live, it can't happen by chance. DNA. The molecule that contains the genetic code, it's basically this is what actually builds the amino acids and proteins. It contains instructions that are necessary for all organisms to live. There are around 210 different types of cells in the human body with the amino acids, whatever, the DNA controls. If you attach the DNA strands in your body, end to end, the DNA would reach around the Earth, would reach from the Earth to the sun and back 600 times, if you could stretch it all out. And the reason it's interesting is people are studying the cells not just for biology. Computer scientists are studying it because it is so densely packed. The information you can contain within a small piece of DNA is astronomical. The human genome has 3 billion letters. So when you think about the DNA, you've got to it's so packed in your cell, basically it's 3 billion letters long. The amount of digital data in the world is estimated to be 3 zettabytes. That's about 3 times 10 to the 21st power. That's a lot of byte. And think about all the information on the internet, everything. A recent study concluded that all the world's data, take all that information, would be stored in approximately 1 kilogram of DNA. So if you can put all that information and compact it like you do a DNA, you can take 1 kilogram of DNA and it would handle all the world's information. Now you think about how much information that's in your body. Now think about that just happening by chance. So odds are astronomical, basically practically impossible. Different institutes claim to calculate the storage capacity of a single gram of DNA. The widespread, a single gram of DNA will hold 215 petabytes or 215 million gigabytes. I said this during a thing, and I brought a smaller one in. You see the size of this thing. You can get these now in 512. You get this holds 512 gigabyte. This one doesn't, but you can buy them that way. You would need 840,000 of these things to hold the same information of 1 kilogram of DNA. If you stacked all these together, that would equate to 420 kilograms or 926 pounds. So think about 926 pounds worth of, these are about a half a gram a piece. So think about 926 pounds of these things, and that's equivalent to 1 kilogram, which is about 2 pounds of DNA. And so that's why computer scientists are studying this, because if they can mimic the storage capacity of a DNA, I mean, then, you know, this thing right here can hold basically a fourth of all the world's information. And so a size like this, if you can mimic the storage capacity of DNA. The brain. And this one is the most interesting of them all. The brain is often compared basically to a computer. And people will equate it to the internet. In every in every way that it has been tested, the brain is still far superior to most powerful computers in existence, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. Now, I say that when you talk about calculations, vast amount of calculations. There's some certain things that a computer will do better than a human. I know the days of slide rules. I never learned one. I've got 2 at home, but I've never learned how to use them because I had a computer. I plugged the numbers in. I never bothered to learn a slide rule. So major calculations, a computer can do those repetitive really well. But there's some things it can't do well. And this is where kind of the engineering side comes in. Your brain storage capacity is considered virtually unlimited. It doesn't get used up like RAM or things like that. The latest research shows that the brain's memory capacity is in the petabyte range, which is a quadrillion bytes. It's about the same amount needed to store the entire internet, close to it, you know, as we talked about earlier. It is postulated that the brain operates at 1 exaflop. That's basically 10 to the 18th calculations per second. So basically your brain is operating that fast. You may not think about it, but everything that's going on, your motions, your movement, your eyes motions, your eye focusing, nervous systems, anything like that, the beating of your heart, the pumping of your blood, the breathing, everything, your brain is handling that. So that's about the calculations that they figured how fast the brain is operating, 10 to the 18th calculations per second. For comparison, in 2021, Tesla's supercomputer achieved 1.8. And that, to achieve that, it comprised of 5,760 NVIDIA graphics cards. So those gamers out there who are on the computer, you have an NVIDIA graphics card in there, you know, gaming it up. So Tesla's supercomputer put in 5,760 of those things. So you got this big, huge room, big, huge server, big thing, and it's still only 1.8. So it's getting close to the speed, but it's 5,760 of those things. Researchers involved in the AI projects have developed a way to compare supercomputers' brains to, of course, the supercomputers around the world. When they can do the comparison, the human brain is 30 times more powerful than the IBM Sequoia, which is the picture on the top. So that's can't really tell by size, but it's a pretty decent size computer system made of multiple cores, things like that. But the speed of the human brain and how it operates is actually 30 times more powerful than that. Japan supercomputer, which is the one on the below that, the K computer, is one of the most powerful computers in the world. When programmed to simulate human brain activity, it took 40 minutes to crunch the data equivalent to 1 second of brain activity. So again, you think of all the stuff that your brain is processing, everything that the thing is doing. The data, when they plug it into this thing, it took about 40 minutes for the supercomputer to crunch through the numbers. And so you have the capacity and the things of the human body. When you look at it, it's amazing. Now, when I say about that, we talked about the brain and what it's doing. Like I'm here, I'm standing, I'm balancing. If I move back and forth, I'm really not thinking about it. Everybody have You know that person's got the, kind of just a natural sway or movement to them or balance or whatever. It's unconscious. You just don't think about it, but you're doing it. But you think about like balance. You don't think about balancing on one foot. You stand up, balance on one foot. You walk, you're balancing your ankles, all your joints, everything's coming into play. Your brain is all that's functioning without even you consciously thinking about it. You're walking up and down the stairs. So when we talk about brain activity, it's doing all that. The Honda Asimo robot. Everybody seen this robot before? It's actually pretty cool. He's not very tall. Stands about 4 foot tall or so. But the thing on there, you can barely see it. He's been in development for about 20 years by Honda. At the very base there, it says he's got about 57 degrees of freedom. And what that means is, and this is, again, going back to kind of the engineering side, and this is a course I ended up taking for a master's, is that a degree of freedom, like your fingers, you move, you got a degree of freedom in each joint, motions, things like that. So this robot, 20 years in development, the biggest jump they had, the previous robot had about 23 degrees of freedom. They made a big improvement and got it to about 57. The human body has in total roughly 244 degrees of freedom. So when you think about all the motions your human body can make, it's a magnitude much higher than this robot that's been in development for about 20 years. These 244 degrees of freedom controlled by 630 muscles that we have inside of us. And so again, we don't give thought to this, we just do it. People go on the treadmill, they walk, they go up and down the street. It's a natural motion. The example on there I put up there is just kind of basically what an arm would do. A basic arm, now I'm taking away your fingers. Don't do anything with your fingers, just leave your arm, shoulder. That's basically a 6 degree of freedom motion. So if you're running the control system for a robot like that, this is off one of my projects I did, your math gets pretty hairy. You end up with a 6x6 matrix to go through every axis, and with your matrix, you end up with they call it a Jacobian matrix at the base. I don't know if you can still see that. This is kind of blowing it up, but this is actually the condensed equations in each cell. So each cell has its own equation, and so you have this huge matrix, and that's just to handle, say, a left arm. So the math involved and everything involved in trying to just control a robot, the control systems, get quite extensive. But yet your body does this naturally. Your body doesn't even think about it. Grab, move something like that. And again, the robot I'm talking about and the equations here would only mimic your shoulder, your elbow, and your wrist. No fingers involved. You add your fingers, and they grow exponentially. But again, this is the condensed version of the equations, like C's over cosines, S's for sines, things like that. So it's a lot of trig involved. But again, the math involved with just trying to do a small little arm, part of your body, 6 degrees of freedom. Your body has 244, and yet your brain controls all that with no thought whatsoever. We talk about fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm going to finish up here real quick because we are running out of time. This is by C.S. Lewis. Minds are wholly dependent upon brains, and brains are biochemistry, and biochemistry the meaningless flux of atoms. He said, I cannot understand how the thought of these minds should have any more significance than the sound of wind. What he's talking about is human consciousness. So we're talking about all this. If you hear about AI and all these things throwing about, this is what they're trying to get computers to, because, okay, I showed you just a sample of a matrix. That's just a small sample of what the robot has in it. So we can set and we can code and we can program and we can do all these things to make these robots do something. But it's just that. I'm telling the robot, and using sensors, they're incorporating in your vehicles now. There's probably people in here who may have self-driving vehicles. The sensors on the road, the cameras on the road are looking to see what's going on. And adjusting accordingly. And I know the car I've got's got braking systems to where if it sees a car coming up too fast, it'll go ahead and apply the brakes for you. So we can program, we can code those things for actions to occur. Based on an input, do this output. What he's talking about here is a whole nother level. Thinking for yourselves. Like it was Rene Descartes who said, I think, therefore I am. And so we have thought. And so there was a comment here by C.S. Lewis that the whole point of consciousness for him is just opened up a whole other door. You know, yes, we are atoms, we're chemicals, all this other stuff, but we're so much more than that. So we're running out of time, so I'm going to flip through a couple things real quick. And a lot of this has to do with evolution stuff. Some of you probably heard this before, or familiar with this, Piltdown Man and the Nebraska Man. The only thing I want to say on this one, on the Piltdown Man, in 1912 they found this, and they generated the missing link, they called it. And in 1953, they basically debunked it. What it ended up being was the skull of a human with a jawbone of a monkey. The sad part about this is during this time, have everybody's ever heard of the Scopes trial? This was big evidence to prove the theory of evolution in the Scopes trial to allow evolution to be taught in schools. And it was a hoax all the time. Nebraska Man, another one, they won't claim it's a hoax, but basically they found a tooth and they developed a prehistoric man off of it and ended up being a tooth of a pig when they actually did more studies on it. But with all this being said, David Rupp, he is he passed away in 2015. One of my favorite museums. He was the former curator at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. He said, we're now about 120 years removed from Darwin. The knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded, but we now have a quarter million fossil species. The situation hasn't changed much. We have fewer examples of evolutionary transitions than we had in Darwin's time. So anybody who's familiar with the Darwin's Origin of Species knows that he even himself said there's one glaring issue with his theory: transitional fossils. The fossil record will not back it up. And it still doesn't. In fact, here is David Rupp, the curator of history of a museum, said basically when you look at the expansion of the fossil record, there's actually fewer because the ones they originally had have been debunked. So you've got fewer examples of it. But what's sad is you still have people who are dead set on evolution. I'm going to finish with two more slides, and then we'll wrap it up because still got prayer list. Another quote by C.S. Lewis, and he also is talking about the evolution. Granted that reason prior to matter, I cannot understand how men should come to know a lot about the universe they live in. If, on one hand, I swallow the scientific cosmology and basically Darwinism as a worldview, then I cannot only fit in religion, but I cannot even fit in science. He realized that when you look at the science, that the science doesn't back it up. And in fact, like I said, I listened to a talk today. I want to finish on this one. Actually, I want to skip a slide and go to this last two. So when you look at what the evolutionary theories and stuff that are out there, the evidence really just doesn't back it up. You have gentlemen like Berlinski, I'm just drawing a blank on all the names, Berlinski, Davis, and Stephen Meyer. And like I said, the last one I listened to was a talk, basically Q&A of those three guys. Myers is a Christian, and he reviewed the data, and they're all sitting talking together. and they all see the same set of data. They're all seeing the same information, but they've come to basically three different conclusions. Meyer concluded that there has to be a God. There's no explanation for this. David Berlinski came to the conclusion like, no, evolution doesn't explain it, but there's probably just another theory out there that we just haven't come across yet, is kind of his viewpoint. He won't acknowledge a God, doesn't want to have anything to do with God, but he says, Christianity's not for him, but evolution is not going to work. The other gentleman, he's a computer scientist. His name is David Galanter. He said that, okay, there's got to be some sort of designer out there. There's got to be a God, but he doesn't really believe in the design is intelligent and that God just kind of tried his best. And so he doesn't really believe in God or the Bible. So when you look at all this, you look at the information, you see how you come to the conclusion, why do people believe what they believe? And a lot of it I think a lot of it is the denial of God and the denial of not wanting God. One of the ones I skipped over and is basically that. He says, I don't want to believe there's a God. He said, paraphrasing, he said, I want atheism to be true. I don't want to be made uneasy by the fact that there's some intelligent being out there that created us. He said, I hope that I am right in my belief, and I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want there to be a universe like that. And so you have people that are like that. They're dead set, and the reason they're dead set in that way is because they don't want there to be a God. Because if there's a God, they have to be accountable. It's so much nicer when you don't have accountability, especially in this day and age. But the biblical response to all this, in Romans 1, 18 through 23, I think kind of sums it up. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath shown it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And so here we have Paul writing and basically talking about that, God's made it plain for everybody to see. It's just, are we going to accept it or are we not? I'm going to finish there because we are running out of time, so I don't know if Pastor's going to do prayer list. I think I see him coming in, but thank you for the attention. So I'll turn over to Pastor now.
All right, do y'all learn anything? Did anybody not learn anything? Because he can keep going. Thank you for watching today. God's placed on my heart for our church here at Oxford Lake Baptist Church to be a lighthouse to our community. We pray that the gospel is spoken to your heart. You know Christ is your Savior. But if you don't know if heaven's your home, we implore you, please reach out. We'd love to show you from the Word of God how you can become saved. We'd like to invite you, if you're watching online, if you have an opportunity to come visit us, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out. You can always call us or email us. And if we can be a blessing to you or your family anytime, please reach out. God bless.